Hello everyone, and welcome to the lecture on generators in Python. So generators are also called generator functions. So these terms are used interchangeably. So what are generators? Generators are functions that produce a sequence of results instead of a single result or value. And generator functions use the yield statement. So generators or generator functions are functions that produce a sequence of results or series of results instead of one result, and they use the yield statement. We know that a normal function uses the return statement, whereas a generator function uses the yield statement. That's the difference between a normal function and generator or generator functions. So if our function has this yield statement, it can have one or more yield statement. If it has the yield statement, it's called a generator function or simply generator. Okay, let's start by defining or looking at a normal function. So we have our def statement and then our function name, and we have our parameter, let's say x, and we have our return statements, right? For instance, let's say return x. So this is a normal function. So if we run this function, let's say we can call our function by calling the function name, and then it accepts one parameter. Let's pass, for instance, 4. So in this case, it will return 4. We get 4, right? What if we have multiple return statements? Let's say return x plus 1, and let's have one more return statement and say x plus 2. So in this case, if we call our function, a normal function only returns a single value. So in this case, it will only return the first return statement, which is 4 in this case. So if we run this, we only get 4. If we run it again, we still get 4. If we run it again and then pass a different variable, let's say 5, we'll only get 5. Okay, so that's a normal function. It only produces one value or result. Now let's create a generator function similar to this normal function. So we have defined the def keyword and then our generator function name. So same as a normal function, that we pass our attribute. As I mentioned, generator functions use the yield keyword. So let's say yield x. Let's look at this first. And then, okay, let's start with one yield statement. Okay. Now, when we call our generator function and pass, let's say 4. So what will happen at this moment is that calling this generator function will create a generator object, but it will not start running our function until we call another method. So here we are calling our generator function, which is generator name. This is our function. So this will create, when we run this, it will create a generator object. Let me run it and show you. So now a generator object is created at this memory. Again, calling a generator function will only create a generator object at certain location in memory, And in order for it to start running our function, we have to call another method or function known as the next method. Okay, so if we save this in a variable called x, for instance, now we need to call the next method. So if we call, once we call the next method, it will start returning results or values one at a time. So if we call x.next, our generator function will now yield 4. And we can keep calling the next function until all the values are produced. So in this case, we only have one value. Now, if we call the next function again, or method, we'll get an error called a stop iteration error, because it has produced all the results. Now let's take the same example and add a couple more yield statements. So let's say yield x and then yield x plus 1, yield x plus 2. Okay, so this is a generator function or a generator because it has one or more yield statements. What we'll do next is we'll call our generator function. So generator name and then pass our attribute, let's say 4. So at this time it will create a generator object. Calling our generator function produces a generator object, and if we save that in a variable, and then next, when we call the next method, it will start running our generator function and yield results. So if we call the next method, we get the first yield statement, which is 4. Now if we call the next method again, we'll get the second yield statement, which is 4 plus 1. We get 5. And if we call next again, we get the next yield statement, which is 4 plus 2, 6 in this case. So our generator function has produced a sequence of results one at a time. And finally, if we call the next method again, we'll get a stop iteration exception, right? Because we have gotten all our results. So the key difference between return and yield statements is that return, when you call return, it terminates your function entirely, right? Whereas when we use yield statements, it pauses your function and it saves the state, right? And later continues from where it left off. That's what we have here. First time we called it, we got 4. And then second time we called the next function, we got 5. So every time you call the yield statement, it pauses your function, saving its state, and later continues from where it left off. So that's the key difference between the yield statement and the return statements. And again, calling your generator function creates a generator object, and it will start running your function once you call the next method on your function. And finally, you will get a stop iteration error when you have gotten all your results. Let's look at one more example of a generator function or generators. Okay, we'll start with our def keyword and then name for our generator function. Let's say decrease, and takes one attribute. Let's say while we can say x is greater than 0, yield x. then we can say x is equal to x minus 1, so that we don't run into an infinite loop. So this is a generator function. Let's call our function decrease, and then let's pass our attribute or parameter, let's say 7. So calling this function will create a generator object, and memory in our disk is here. Now let's save this in a variable called, let's say, number, or simply let's say a is equal to decrease, and then our function. Now that we have our generator object, we can call the next method on it, right? So a.next, this will give us 7, right? So it's 7, while x is greater than 0, yield x. So first is it's 7, right? We got 7, and then x is equal to x minus 1. So the next value of x is 6. So is 6 greater than 0? Yes. So our function will give us 6. So when we call the next function again, we'll get 6. And when we call the next function again, we'll get 5, right? Because we are taking 1, we are subtracting 1 from the last value of x. And then when we call the next function again, we'll get 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1, because the yield statement pauses the function, saving its previous state, and continues from where it left off. Then 1, and finally we'll get our stop iteration error, right? Once you get all your results, you'll get the stop iteration error. So if you call while you have the stop iteration error, if you call the next method, you'll still get the iteration error, because that's where it left off finally, right? And in order to run your function, in order to go through this function, you have to call, we have to create a generator object and then call the next method. So we have to save this. Let's say we call our generator object and then pass some variable that we want, and we save this in a variable. It could be the same variable or a different variable, it doesn't matter. And then call the next method on your variable. So b.next will give us 3, and then if you call the next method again, you'll get 2. Let me remove those. Now if you call the next method, we'll get 2, and then 1, and finally we'll get our stop iteration error. In the next lecture, we'll look at some more examples of generators. Thank you, everyone.